Hello everyone, Jazzy is back with the Kingdom Hearts Theory video. Just last weekend we had a major and final update to Kingdom Hearts Union Cross. There were, I think, either like 12 or 13 cutscenes released, so of course there's a lot to discuss, a lot of new content, a lot of continued conversations and references back to scenes, even from Kingdom Hearts backstory cover. And it's a lot to take in, but we're gonna sit here, break it down, and of course get to the nitty gritty about the big face reveal of this update, which is what I'll spend a lot of this video on. So first, I'll just do a quick recap in terms of some of the other conversations that were going on between the Master of Masters and Darkness, and between the Master of Masters and Luxu in terms of the 7 lights and 13 darknesses, and the mention or going into or segue into this world of Quadratum. And then of course I'll get into the nitty gritty in terms of the fates of all these Kingdom Hearts Union Cross characters and what situation seems to be going on with Luxu and Brain specifically. So sit back and relax, enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and share. Of course, you can leave comments in terms of your theories, or maybe things that I've missed, and my head is like exploding right now, trying to figure out what is going on. It's like I'm trying to take in any and every piece of information that I can find, either through the cutscenes, secret reports, whatever, to try to figure out what is going on now in Dark Road and in future Kingdom Hearts and going into Quadratum. So let's first go into just really quickly go through a lot of the cutscenes, just pointing out major events that happened, and while also building on some theories I presented in the past that were now confirmed or explained better essentially than what I was trying to say. And so let's get to it. The first cutscene we'll discuss is A Fictional World, in which we have this continued conversation between the Master of Masters and Darkness in terms of where the Master of Masters wants to disappear to. Ace essentially keeps referencing this fictional world in which the Master of Masters has this desire to go to a place where darkness and light have no control, a place that darkness can't even imagine. So the main idea here is that the Master of Masters is essentially saying, when humans die, they like to think that there's a place for them after death, aka heaven, and this is this imaginary world that only humans can dream up. So darkness, again, cannot even fathom this place because they're not human. So again, going back to the previous update, the first part of the finale, he introduced this idea of the 7 crowns that will follow him into this world, and I still think these 7 crowns are going to be Sora, Riku, Kairi, and then in some way, shape, or form, it's going to be Ephemer, Skuld, Brain, and the player. So I still think those are the 7 crowns that are going to be important into the Quadratum world. And if you've seen a lot of my previous videos, you already know that I think Brain, Skuld, Ephemer, and the player are going to be manifest, or essentially be sharing a body or stealing the bodies and using their hearts inside, or using the Quadratum characters as their vessels for their hearts. So again, Brain will become the hat guy that we see, Skuld become the girl, Ephemer will be called Yuzora, and the player will probably become the glasses guy. Also, in my last video, I had presented the theory that that inside the black box is going to be this data stored of all the 7 lights and the 13 darknesses, whether it be the original forms or specifically the data from the Kingdom Hearts Union Cross characters, because that's what they mentioned in one of the cutscenes, is that I think Brain had said that, our data is not in the data world because it hasn't been accessed yet. So that would lead me to believe that yes, their data is in this black box, and possibly the data of the 13 darknesses, and maybe even the data of the Masters and his apprentices, and if not the apprentices, maybe his original 6 comrades. And again, that's something we'll get into which is a nice segue into the next cutscene, 7 and 13. In the next cutscene, 7 and 13, now we have this ongoing conversation between the Masters and Lucio, in which now the Masters finally reveals and confirms that yes, he did lose comrades and loved ones to his conflict with darkness during his childhood days. So this is something, we have theorized in terms of there originally being seven original lights, with the Master of Masters being the only one that survived. Essentially, that's what it seems like. Another thing that he pointed out, and that did clarify from my last theory video, is that yes, the Master of Masters and his apprentices all have darkness stored within them, or they're sharing the same being essentially. So yes, there's 7 lights, but then they defeated those 7 darknesses, and now they harbor both a light and darkness within them. And then of course, since there's 13 darknesses, you have 6 others. And we learned that these 6 others, well, 5 are technically in the data world and 1 is not. But 5 of these darknesses were supposed to be, trapped or become one with the 5 union leaders. And of course, we do see the one that becomes trapped inside Ven, and then there's 4 other ones that are in the data world. And there's one that was first, talking to Lucio, but then they ended up in a fight. So now it's interesting to see where those darknesses actually end up, and and when this exchange will happen. Because at this point, I don't think that the darknesses that were in the data world are I know that the darknesses in the data world are not within these individuals yet. So there has to be something that's going to come up later down the line in terms of how those darknesses will get transferred to the union leaders. Another thing that I want to point out that will become very important later in this theory video is that, of course, the Master of Masters explicitly referred to Lucio as the traitor. And he's keep encouraging him to, go on his feelings, whatever he thinks, just do it. Even though he gave him a certain task, dealing with the Keyblade in the black box, but his actions are seen as traitorous to the Master of Masters in this master plan. So again, that's just something to keep in mind in terms of Lucio's role in all this and what's getting set up for the future. So to quickly recap what the idea I presented in the last video is that, of course, you have these 7 original lights. The characters I present here are just kind of placeholders, but I am hoping that Demix and Luxord kind of have that bigger role in which they were original lights during the Master of Masters' childhood, that possibly were defeated by the darkness, and maybe even maybe this is what really ties to the fictional world. Maybe again they are from the fictional world because the Master of Masters imagined this place that he can send all his loved ones to, and maybe that's his master plan, is just trying to find a way to bring them back into the real world, bring them back to the living or something like that. Because again, if you've seen my previous videos, there's always ideas about data transfer, making nobody somebody, stealing hearts and putting in other vessels and that kind of stuff. So maybe that's what's going to occur in this next arc, is the Master of Masters finally trying to complete his plan about bringing his comrades back. So that's where I think that's heading. If Sterling, Lucia, Ven, and Larxene are original lights, that'll be interesting, because I feel like Ven is this important. He's a chosen child. He's been here since the Age of Fairy Tales through current times, so maybe Ven is an original light. And then I would feel that if it's seen that Lucia probably has a strong connection to the Master of Masters, so maybe she is an original light and doesn't realize it. And of course, her brother being Marluxia, or being Laurium, then that would, bring him into the mix. And then Arena is also connected to those two. So that's kind of why I picked those 7, because they kind of stood out in that respect. But again, the original 7 may be totally different characters we're not aware of yet, or maybe they're other characters that we've already been introduced to. So I'm curious to see what the original forms look like. And speaking of original forms, of course, the 13 Darknesses also had a physical form before they abandoned it. So again, with those, it'll be very interesting to see who these 13 original darknesses are. And if we've already met these characters, we're just not aware of that's what their original form was. Of course, going into what I was saying earlier is that yes, Massive Masters had essentially trained his 6 apprentices to be these really, really strong lights along with him, so they can defeat that darkness and harbor darkness and light within themselves. And then again, that explains why we see these 7 black pieces on the chessboard now on Master Xehanort's side, while we're still trying to figure out how many white chess pieces will come up on Ericus's side. So will it be the 6 pieces that are connected to the other 6 darknesses that are kind of still out there? Will more black pieces appear and become 13 again? Or, the light will still say 7? Or is there going to be more lights now? Is there going to be 7 lights? Is there going to be 6 lights? What's going to happen? But again, we do know that probably eventually these other darknesses will end up within the Union leaders. And because we already know, again, that the one darkness is inside Ben, and that will manifest as Vanitas. So in terms of thinking of which one is freed, I would assume that the 4 in the data world and the 1 in Ben are going to be the 5 that are going to eventually be trapped within these people. So whichever one Luxu was communicating with in the real world prior to, all these events happening at the finale, I think that one would be the one that was trapped. Because the Masters mentioned that the one darkness will be trapped, I guess, in Daybreak Town. So I don't know if he means he's going to be trapped in the real world, and this is kind of that darkness that's just like here, and it keeps spreading and going everywhere. So in terms of what he means by trapped, I don't know if it's really trapped or it's like he's saying like this darkness is always just going to be around in this world type of idea, type of situation. One idea I did have is that maybe even Luxu has a role in terms of having these darknesses interact with these characters later on. We do know that Luxu, especially from this update, he encounters Brain, and then in the form of Braig in the future, if Skuld is Subject X, we know that they also encountered each other. So I wonder, maybe Luxu is even like physically like placing these darknesses in others, because he, the Masters told him that these 5 darknesses were supposed to be placed in his Union leaders. So that's a role that I can see Luxu doing, most definitely. And since Alicia is not around, there's no vessel for that light, or for that darkness, unfortunately. So then you have that situation where you have her separate light and then a separate darkness still around. Of course, I would still like to go with the idea that the 4 darknesses that remain in the data world will probably be released by Xehanort, and maybe it will come to possess his comrades that again were probably not strong enough to handle the darkness, and they'll follow the darkness, and then that would explain the 4 graves, and maybe that becomes Xehanort's whole ordeal within Dark Road, is dealing with these 4 darknesses that possibly escape from the data world. And of course, going into this next segment, we do learn that the player and Xehanort have a very strong connection, and so that's why I think that Xehanort will have a very strong connection to these 4 darknesses. And these 4 darknesses are the last beings that the player will encounter. Moving along to another cutscene called Breaking Free. Now we have a situation in which we see that Marluxia resolves to find his sister Strelitzia in the future, and he leaves to go to the future with Elrena and Ven, while Brain decides to stay back and try to figure out a way to save the player, Ephemer, and Skuld out of the data world. So he decides to send 2 pods back into the data world, knowing that one also still remains there, and that can help those 3 escape at least into the real world. Going into the next series of cutscenes, we see what situation is going on between the player, Ephemer, and Skuld, who are still stuck in the data world. In the Heart That Fell to Darkness cutscene, we see that the player seemingly falls to darkness and starts to turn on Ephemer and Skuld as these four darknesses that are in the data world appear before them. Essentially, what the player's plan was for Ephemer to open with this gate that will transport the darkness and the player to this portal cable area. And I guess it seemed like this gate was opened up by Ephemer essentially striking the player through the heart. So I don't know if this portal gate or portal cable thing, or, he's just making this portal through opening up someone's heart or whatever. So I wonder if that's a mechanism or something like that. It's like whatever the desire is in their heart, if you strike it with the keyblade, it'll kind of open up a portal to some place, maybe something like that. But whatever happened, they ended up in this portal cable area, and Ephemer and Skuld decide to, with the player gone now, they decide to use those two pods that were sent back, and then they continue on into the real world, and then seeing the destruction, of Daybreak Town, they decide, to continue to use those pods and go to whatever destination they end up. Now, the player, of course, was tricking the darkness in terms of having Ephemer and him, or him, she, it, they, whatever, trap the darkness in this portal cable area, which will not allow them to spread as they wanted to through the data world, and then that darkness will seep out into the real world. So essentially they were able to trap the darkness in this area, but then the player kind of falls. We see this cute but really kind of sad cutscene in which we get the closed cage and somber cutscene, and the player is kind of floating off into death essentially, and they kind of are, well, not to death, I guess slumber, since the player will encounter all the other Keyblade builders who are Dandelions, I should say, who are stuck in the data world. And with this scene, we see that the Dandelions that fall into the sleep either have a choice to kind of, go to sleep and merge with their Charity, and they actually became the Dream Eaters in Dream Drop Distance. So all your little allies and friends you're working with, that Sora is bonding with, is people from this the Dandelions from Kingdom Hearts Union Cross. Cute little surprise, and again, but kind of sad though, because then you're essentially having these people fight alongside you, and some of them will fall, but we are in this cutscene presented with another option that the player decided to take, is to go to sleep but then let their heart dissolve into a new heart. And so then you get this really quick cutscene in which we see a woman, an old man, and a baby. And the woman gives the baby to the old man. And of course, if you look at the baby, dark skin, silver hair, it's going to be Xehanort. And of course, they do flash forwards in which the old man brings the baby to Destiny Islands. The baby grows up to be Xehanort. Seems like the old man dies, unfortunately, but then Xehanort finds himself, of course, back in Skala Kylum, and of course he meets Ericus, and now we're at the point of getting to the Dark Road game now. Of course, this cutscene introduces more backstory to Xehanort in terms of, this woman is probably his mother. I don't know who the old man is in relation to them. Maybe that's his grandfather. Not sure. But now we have this kind of family dynamic set up. And then we see that Xehanort is not originally from Destiny Islands. He's from this city that will come to know as being Skala Kylum. So this is what I was referring to earlier in terms of the player having a strong connection to the four darknesses, and how that's going to carry over to Xehanort, because now we see that the player and Xehanort are sharing a heart. And that's why at the beginning of Dark Road we see Xehanort having all these memories of the player, especially with Ephemer and Skuld. So he definitely has a strong connection to those two specifically, and probably the other Union Cross characters as well. And again, maybe that's why he gravitated towards Lorem. He gravitated towards Elrena, is because he has these memories of, and Ven, of course, and Ven, because he has these memories of these people. Another thing I did want to point out from this cutscene is interesting is that how the player, the player's heart, when they decided to dissolve into a new heart, kind of floated away in that same kind of way that Sir Lucius did, even though she was slain. So I wonder, even when Sir Lucius was kind of that in between state, that she decided to let her heart dissolve into another's, and that's why, again, I would like to strongly connect her to Kyrie, and maybe even Master Ava, which I'll get into. I would think that how both of their situations, the player and Cilicia situations, ended, that that's going to set up for future characters down the line, and already previously discussed the idea of sharing hearts and birthing new lights in different generations and that kind of thing. And so that's kind of one of the last ideas I want to leave this video off with, is that now that we're seeing the player's heart is being reborn into Xehanort, now I wonder if the player in Xehanort's heart will be reborn into Riku, and then maybe even transfer over to Yozora. So maybe that's what they're trying to set up. But between Xehanort and Riku, for me, that would make sense, because we do have that cutscene. I think it was from Dream Drop Distance. No, I think it's actually Birth by Sleep. In Birth by Sleep, I think Terra, when he sees Riku standing at the beach, he turns into, a little kid Riku, and then what he looks like as a teenager that we see him in Kingdom Hearts 2, but then he also transforms to Xehanort. So I think that's Terra's realization that, these two, Xehanort and Riku, are connected. They're sharing a heart. Now again, trying to figure out who the player is. Is the player the Master of Masters? Is the player Luxord? Is the player Demyx? I'm still leaning towards Demyx, but then it'd be kind of weird for Riku and Demyx to kind of exist at the same time. But whatever. And maybe the player is none of these people. The player is someone separate. Maybe the player is an original light from the Master's time. I don't know. But whatever the case, this player is very important to a lot, and connected to a lot of these main characters in Kingdom Hearts. Of course, last but not least, we have, the kind of chain of heart sharing, which I think originated with Master Ava, which is why she's missing and her heart is getting shared with Sterlitzia. Sterlitzia is slain and her heart probably dissolved within Kyrie. Maybe Kyrie's goes on to the girl or whatnot. They may not be connected to the Quadratum characters, because I don't see that connection myself. And of course, we know Ava and Cilicia, and then even at a point, Kyrie also does go missing. So it's not a stretch to say that there's so many parallels between these three characters that they're probably all sharing a heart as well. So this is where I'll end part 1 of this discussion of the Kingdom Hearts Union Cross finale, and kind of, leaving you with this image of having this idea again of all these people sharing hearts, and these reiterations of 7 lights in different generations. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the apprentices share a face with any of these other characters down their lines. Be very interesting again to see the faces of the rest of the apprentices, and of course the Master of Masters. And now we just have to wait to see what unfolds in Dark Road, to see what's going on with Xehanort, Ericus, and their comrades, and if they do have a strong connection to these other characters or not, or maybe it's the upperclassmen. We still don't know who the upperclassmen are, what they look like. We know that Baldear's sister is one of them. That's the only bit of information that we have. We can guess maybe Yen Sid is one of them, because I think Yen Sid became a master at the same time Xehanort and Ericus did. I don't know how, age separates upperclassmen and lowerclassmen in terms of if they're much older or not. But that's something to also think about in terms of what's going on with this generational familial connections that seem to be coming into play now. And I'll definitely get into that discussion in the next video. So I hope you enjoyed. Again, like, comment, share, subscribe, and I will catch you in part 2 of this Union Cross finale update.